Feminism is the glaring thing in front of us where we have fertility rates down, we have marriage rates down. The women in the West have it the best in the world, and yet they're way unhappier than women of sub-Saharan Africa. There's something fundamentally wrong here, because the women of sub-Saharan Africa have something that a lot of women in the West do not have. The women in the West have cats, and they have good jobs, and the women of sub-Saharan Africa, they have a belief in the divine, and they have kids. And maybe there's a biological undercurrent that is keeping a lot of women from realizing their full potential.
Hello and welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and if you're watching this, you are probably about to dive into something that might be a little bit triggering for you or touches on the nerves for a lot of us. We're going to talk about a public figure whose words often echo familiar and unsettling sentiments for anybody that grew up in this world that I came from, the evangelical world. We're talking about Charlie Kirk and his views on feminism and gender roles today, and why dissecting those views is so crucial, especially for those of us who identify as exvangelical. For so long, for me and maybe for you too, the roles of men and women, the very concept of gender, wasn't just a societal construct or a biological reality. It was a divine blueprint handed down from God with exact instructions. Absolute and unchanging.
We've seen the men of the West resist this. They don't like taking orders from women. They certainly do not like the totalitarian impulses that we've seen designed. And even beyond that, this is where it becomes like, let's just say more controversial, but it's fine. If the church is serious about reclaiming culture, again, this is where people are going to get a little uneasy, we must crush feminism at its core. Feminism is a byproduct of the worst possible impulses. And feminism is an outgrowth of this idea that first and foremost, that the woman must be liberated. You guys should all read The Feminine Mystique. If you want to read the original anthem of where feminism came from, it is The Feminine Mystique, where she literally was like, I am a prisoner in my home raising children, and I must have my shackles released, and I am going to be liberated from the prison of my home, and by doing so, the world will become a better place. And women will then go into the corporate career, and we won't have to, go just bear children, and we'll be happier, and we'll be like men, and we'll be able to make good decisions.
I grew up in a world where gender roles were rigidly defined, presented as biblical truth, and non-negotiable. And when I hear figures like Charlie Kirk speaking about these types of topics, it is a little upsetting, and it's not new information for a lot of us. It's just a louder, often more aggressive echo of what we were taught was God's sacred design for gender, for humanity, for sex, when you grew up in the church.
The women of the West are miserable, and they're miserable for a reason, because we've told them to suppress how they are made by God and pursue something else and get a bunch of trinkets and get a bunch of promotions, and they end up at 38 years old with a big flat in London, and they're miserable. And we should tell them to stop freezing their eggs and start finding their partner earlier and have lots of babies.
Before we go any further, let's get really clear on what we're talking about. What is feminism? From a really broad intersectional perspective, feminism is about equality. It's about challenging patriarchal power structures, advocating for social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. It's bodily autonomy, equal pay, challenging gender-based violence, and recognizing the diverse experiences of women in all genders. It's about freeing everybody from rigid, harmful boxes. Feminism isn't just about women. But what is feminism from Charlie Kirk's perspective? Well, that's what we're going to be spending a lot of time on today, because for him, it's often presented as a caricature. It's an anti-male, anti-family, and anti-God, destructive, Marxist ideology designed to dismantle Western civilization and traditional values.
Let me also speak to some of the young ladies here in high school where who's here where your top priority is get married and have kids? Raise your hand. Okay. Interestingly, I think there is an argument to bring back the MRS degree. And no, seriously. And just be clear, that's why you're going to college, right? Don't lie to yourself, I'm studying sociology. No, you're not. We know why you're here. And that's okay, actually. And that's a really good reason to go to college, actually. Especially an SEC school. You will find a husband if you have the intent to find a husband at Ole Miss. It's just going to happen, okay? Or wherever. We should bring back the celebration of the MRS degree. which is, no, serious. I mean, if you think about it, like I say college is a scam, but if you're going to find your life partner, like that's actually a really good reason to go to college.
He paints it not as a movement for liberation, but as a corrosive force. And it's not just an academic exercise either. This is where the exvangelical lens becomes absolutely critical. We're not just discussing politics or social commentary. We're dissecting a belief system that directly impacts health and personal identity and intimate relationships, family dynamics, and profound spiritual health. For many of us, the very core of our being was shaped by these prescribed gender roles, and dismantling them is an act of deep, personal, and spiritual deconstruction. So who is Charlie Kirk? For those of you who are fortunately unfamiliar, he is the founder of Turning Point USA. It's a massively influential conservative youth organization. Even if it doesn't sound familiar, you've probably seen clips of it on TikTok or his time on campus debating.
Free sex drives young women insane. The more sexual partners a young woman has in college, the more likely she is to be clinically depressed, on antidepressants, because sex for men is totally different than sex for women. Sex for women is emotional attachment, it is relational, it is not transactional, and is not purely physical. For whatever reason, the way men were designed and wired, sex, they could have sex with 9 people over 2 weeks and just like, okay, whatever. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
He hosts a daily radio show, he has a popular podcast, and he has a huge presence across social media platforms, especially with younger audiences. His voice is significant because he's directly shaping the minds of a new generation of conservatives, often drawing from and reinforcing evangelical ideas about gender, family, and society. He's putting a modern, politically charged spin on very old, very familiar doctrines.
If you want to know whether or not a marriage is going to work, you know what the number one indicator is? You can use this in marital counseling.
Tell me.
And the data. How many sexual partners does the woman have?
Oh.
Yeah. If it's 5 or more, the marriage almost will not work out. Guaranteed.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see it
But
because...
it sounds sexist, but it actually doesn't matter how many the man has had.
No, well, this is a great...
Meaning it's not an indicator. It matters spiritually.
Well, listen, I got to tell you, you said something that people need to know about, people need to hear, especially the young people, is that a woman who, I'll just use the term, samples the field.
Yeah, fine.
She thinks she's liberated. She thinks she can do what a guy does in that area. I'm not condoning the conduct, but she's so made different that what happens is it's an imprint upon her
100%.
that it's so forever for her. And if she has 5 or 10, there's an imprint where the guy, and again, I'm not bashing guys, but a guy is more forgetful. He's not impressionable that way.
I want to analyze Charlie Kirk's anti-feminist arguments, trace their profound roots in the very specific doctrines of evangelical complementarianism and patriarchy that shaped a lot of our experiences, and explore the very real-world consequences that this can have on individuals today. Finally, I do want to talk to the ex-evangelicals out there and offer a path not only to deconstruct these harmful ideas, but to build a way more equitable, authentic, and compassionate future for yourselves and then those around you. So get comfortable. This is going to be a deep, deep dive. Let's dive in. So let's start by deconstructing Charlie Kirk's anti-feminist arguments. My goal here is not to strawman him, but to present his points completely fairly as he articulates them, and then critically analyze them through our exvangelical lens. I've spent time listening to his speeches, reading his statements, going through his TikTok and Instagram, watching various appearances, and what kind of comes forth for me is a very consistent, often aggressive narrative. The first major argument, and one that you hear again and again from Charlie Kirk and people that he surrounds himself with, is that feminism is inherently anti-family and anti-motherhood.
I think that we've gone wrong here, that women should prioritize family and children way above career, that they should try to find their husband before they're 25.
I think men should stop committing 98% of all violent crime. Stop harassing and following and stalking, trafficking and unaliving people. Stop starting podcasts. Stop starting wars. Stop trying to marry literal children. Stop trying to tell women what to do with our time and our bodies and telling us what our life goals need to be. You guys need our advice so much more than we need yours.
Kirk's claim is typically presented like this. Feminism actively discourages women from embracing traditional roles, particularly motherhood and homemaking, which Kirk feels leads directly to the breakdown of the nuclear family unit and the home, and then consequently will lead to societal decay.
There's first, second, and third wave feminism. First wave feminism is that women should have a right to vote. Second wave feminism had a lot of problems, which is the female liberation movement, that women should not just be at home, but they should get into the workforce. Third wave feminism is complete garbage, which is toxic modern day feminism, which is irreconcilable with any decent society, which is far more about hating men than actually respecting women. And you guys all know the type of that kind of feminism. There are some good aspects of second wave feminism, but at the core of feminism, we have to ask the question is, has it made American women happier? And it hasn't, actually. American women are more suicidal, more depressed, more anxious than they were prior. And I believe, and again, we get in trouble for saying this, is that you should have the agency and liberty to do whatever you want. But many women, a majority, like 90+% deep down, have this urge to reproduce and to raise children. And we are telling them to forsake that and go become a CEO of a shoe company. And we're wondering why so many young ladies are miserable and angry, because they're at war with something within them that they actually want to do, which is to have a relationship, have children, and nurture future humans into this world.
He often frames it as feminism devaluing the sacred work of raising children and being a wife, maintaining a home. He portrays it as a lesser calling compared to other career aspirations. You'll hear him argue that feminists want women to be unhappy, childless, and perpetually striving for something that will never actually fulfill them. Now, for many of us that grew up in an evangelical space, this argument doesn't just sound familiar. It's practically a sermon outline that we've heard 1,000 times in Bible camps, in Sunday school, and yes, in our church services too. It immediately brings me back to countless sermons or memories about the Proverbs 31 woman who is a virtuous woman who manages her household, cares for her children, and supports her husband. It really does echo conferences on biblical womanhood, where the highest calling for a woman was meticulously laid out as being a wife and a mother. The insidious message was that anything else, any sort of ambitions outside of the home and desire for a significant career or any pursuit of personal passion that didn't directly feed into domestic roles, it wasn't just a deviation, but a spiritual misstep. There was an immense amount of pressure to marry young, to have many children, to consider homeschooling as only really truly godly option for your children, and to see life's purpose primarily through the lens of domestic service.
I would have a few responses to that. I think that women report more stress and dissatisfaction today because, not because they have more rights or because of feminism, but because they're under dual pressure to both excel professionally and also because of the domestic labor in homes that is structured around outdated expectations. So, for example, studies like the OECD's Better Life Index show that women's life expectancy, education levels, professional achievements have risen in countries with higher gender inequality. So I would argue that what you're calling unhappiness is actually visibility, because now we hear women expressing dissatisfaction, whereas in the 50s, we prescribed them Valium and we lobotomized.
The critique here is that Kirk's narrative completely ignores the vast diversity of women's aspirations, the complex economic realities that necessitate two-income households today for a ton of different families, and then ultimately just the fundamental human right to choice.
I just want to say, no one's stopping anyone from being a wife and a mother. You act like it's illegal for women to be wives and mothers now. You can do that, and if there's such a demand for it, then it should be a pretty easy thing for any woman to do. Being a boss or CEO or whatever is such a grueling and depressing existence, then that option is available. The only reason why that wouldn't be available is because men are not as equally interested in that option as well. But if men are just thirsty for these women who want to be wives and mothers, and being a corporate woman is such a depressing existence, then I don't see why there's a mismatch there.
It implies that there is only one correct way for a woman to live a fulfilling life, which is really restrictive and invalidating and just incorrect. Like I said, so many families today require the woman to work. They rely on that income to survive. This isn't just a simple choice. And I think most women would prefer to stay in the home when their children are young, but that's up to them, and it's not right for every single family. The reality is just that with the way the economy is in the United States today, it's not realistic for most families to do that.
The reason why people overall are less happy today than they were in the 1950s is because of wealth inequality. In the 1950s, the top 0.1% of the wealthiest people owned 7% of the nation's wealth. Bottom 90% owned 30 to 40% of the nation's wealth. Today, the top 0.1% owns 20% of the nation's wealth. Top 1% owns 30 to 35% of the nation's wealth. So to just jump to feminism as the reason that we're all unhappy, what the fuck are you talking about? Where we are today versus the 1950s couldn't be more different. None of us can afford anything, nonetheless start a family.
Moving on to the second and also deeply ingrained argument. Feminism is anti-male and anti-God. Kirk often says that feminism is not about equality, but about female dominance. He argues that it actively seeks to emasculate men, stripping them of their natural God-given leadership roles, and is a direct rebellion to what he calls divine order. For Kirk, the very concept of gender equality is a rejection of God's design, which he asserts clearly establishes a hierarchy where men lead and women follow. I actually had someone say this to me once about how I'm emasculating to men, that I was independent, and I remember thinking, if you're so easy to emasculate, what kind of a, masculine man are you then? Because I'm just doing the bare minimum. With this view that Kirk has, you often are going to see the woman fulfilling these traditional roles, but then also working outside of the home, whereas the man only works outside of the home and is not an active parent, not an active loving husband, and doesn't do much else. It's a pretty sour setup for women. In the households where both partners are genuinely trying to do their best, it still isn't fair to the men to have the pressure of being the sole provider, the pressure of being the only one, or feeling like their role as a father is less important than a role as a mother. Again, for anybody with an evangelical background, this is just pure complementarianism. It's just repackaged and amplified. This is the headship doctrine in full force. The husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. This is the idea of submission in marriage, not as mutual respect, but as a unilateral obligation for the wife. It's the teaching that God created men and women with fundamentally different, non-overlapping roles. Men as leaders, providers, and protectors, while women are fundamentally different. They are nurturers, helpers, and supporters.
They've done a really good job of abolishing men in Western society. If I went around this room, I said, are you thrilled or not so happy with the status of American men right now? Would you say happy or not so happy? Yeah, not so happy. And most men would agree, but you should also have a little bit of sympathy for them, just a little bit, because from the time that many of your brothers and many of your friends that are men are old enough to understand what's going on, there is a nonstop war against men in this country. And we need strong men in America.
This wasn't just presented as a suggestion for people. It's taught as the biblical view, the unchanging word of God, essential for a godly marriage and for a functioning society, for raising healthy kids. Kirk's argument fundamentally misrepresents feminism as hating men rather than challenging patriarchal power structures that harm everyone, including men.
I just want to read this short quote from Bell Hooks. As workers, about the effect of patriarchy on women, or on men. As workers, most men in our culture, like working women, are controlled, dominated. Unlike working women, working men are fed a daily fantasy diet of male supremacy and power. In actuality, they have very little power and they know it. Yet they do not rebel against the economic order or make revolution. They are socialized by ruling powers to accept their dehumanization and exploitation in the public world of work, and they are taught to expect that the private world, their world of home and intimate relationships, will restore them their sense of power, which they equate with masculinity. They are taught that they will be able to rule in the home, to control and dominate, that this is the big payoff for their acceptance of an exploitative economic social order. By condoning and perpetuating male domination of women to prevent rebellion on the job, ruling male capitalists ensure that male violence will be expressed in the home and not in the workforce. And that's about capitalism. But it is also about how that patriarchal system is used as a way to subjugate men and make them and immiserate them in their home, as opposed to having a more liberatory perspective about it.
It weaponizes theology to justify male dominance and control, playing directly into fears of female agency and power. A third major line of attack from Kirk is that feminism is a Marxist, secular, or liberal conspiracy. He often frames feminism not as a genuine social movement born from a desire for justice and equality, but as part of a broader progressive agenda. For Kirk, it's an insidious ideological tool explicitly designed to dismantle Western civilization, destroy the traditional family values that we've held onto for so long, and undermine Christianity itself. He places it within a larger cultural war, portraying it as a key component of a secular humanist plot to destroy everything good and holy.
Let me be very clear. If you are a man in this country and you don't vote for Donald Trump, you're not a man. I mean, like, who are you? You're not going to vote for that? I mean,
this narrative, too, is deeply embedded in the evangelical thought. It's the classic slippery slope argument that you've heard a million times. If you accept female leadership, then you might go ahead and accept gay people. Then you might accept socialism. Then you might reject God entirely. The demonization of secular humanism or cultural Marxism, terms that are thrown around as boogeymen, meant that anything outside their narrow, rigid definition of Christian was immediately suspect, part of a larger insidious plot against God's kingdom and from the devil. We were taught to view society through the lens of a perpetual culture war, and feminism was consistently presented as one of the primary enemies in this spiritual battle for the American soul. The critique here is that this argument completely dismisses legitimate grievances, historical struggles for equality, and the very real pain that drives feminist movements. Instead, it reduces them to mere political tactics, part of a grand conspiracy rather than genuine cries for justice and dignity. It prevents genuine dialogue and reinforces an us versus them mentality that demonizes those who seek equality. And finally, Kirk really pushes the idea frequently that feminism ultimately leads women to unhappiness and dysfunction in their lives. His claim is that women who pursue careers, who delay marriage and children, or who embrace non-traditional paths are ultimately unfulfilled, lonely, riddled with regret, and then ironically less happy than those who stick to traditional roles. He argues that true happiness for women can only be found in embracing their divinely ordained purpose from God, and that is in their roles as wives and mothers.
The problem with women is that many of them, A, have unrealistic expectations of the man that they want, a lot of them. And I deal with this all the time. Like, I want a guy that's earning $1 million a year and he's 6'4", and I want him to have a perfect jaw. And I'm like, yeah, that's never going to happen. How about, by the way, where on your list is like, I want someone who will be a good father or someone with good character. So I guess like really disgusting, actually, that you just want someone that's like super rich and looks good.
It's a powerful and manipulative tactic because it preys on very real human desires for meaning and for contentment. For us Exvangelicals, this is the subtle, insidious fear-mongering that kept so many of us in line for so long. It's the constant warnings about burning out if you only chase worldly success, or the narrative that independent, ambitious women are secretly miserable and perpetually searching for a husband or children that they've rejected in the past.
Women want to be taken care of. I know this is like super provocative, but like deep down, they want a man to be able to provide for them financially.
Should a man pay on the first date?
100%. Like, what kind of a wuss beta male is splitting the check? But like, who are you? It's like, I'm just sorry. It's I would go into debt and scrub dishes before a woman paid for it.
I split the check quite a lot.
So I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend you. You guys are great. That's incomprehensible to me.
It's the implied threat that stepping outside of the prescribed role will lead to emptiness. This narrative doesn't just define happiness, it controls it. It keeps women compliant by preying on natural human desires for happiness and fulfillment, but then narrowly defines where and how those can be found. It's often deeply intertwined with purity culture, where marital bliss and perfect family life are promised as rewards for adherence, and any deviation leads to inevitable despair. The critique here is that Kirk's argument ignores systemic barriers, societal pressures, and the vast diversity of human experience.
No means no, and stop means stop, but you would both agree, if two parties are intoxicated, there's gray area, right?
No, I don't.
Actually, yes, the law says that consent cannot be given or withdrawn if both parties or either party is intoxicated. That's the law. The law here in California is that if one party is intoxicated, it is rape by either the woman or the man. That's gray area. So did you know that if you have sex with an intoxicated person, you're a rapist? Did you know that?
It places the blame for unhappiness squarely on women's choices rather than on structural inequalities, societal expectations, or the profound mental and emotional toll of living under oppressive systems. It's a classic tactic to maintain power. Blame the victim for their discontent. Now that we've laid out a few of Kirk's arguments, let's pull back the curtain and look at where these arguments actually come from. Because for so many of us who lived within evangelicalism, these weren't just random opinions from a conservative person. These were foundational truths deeply woven into the fabric of our faith, our theology, and our understanding of God's will for our lives. To really understand Charlie Kirk, you really do have to understand the specific strain of evangelical theology that he's drawing from. Complementarianism is the name of his belief system, and its more extreme family member patriarchy. This is kind of the root of everything. This wasn't always the singular, monolithic view within evangelicalism. If you actually go back and look at Christian Protestantism, there have been a ton of different interpretations of gender roles and how things are supposed to play out. The rise of modern evangelical complementarianism, particularly in its really rigid form, solidified in the 1970s and 80s in American culture as a direct and explicit response to the broader feminist movement. It was in response to these perceived shifts in American culture, and as women gained more rights and entered the workforce in greater numbers and challenged these norms, certain segments of evangelicalism felt threatened. They actually saw feminism not as a movement for justice, but as an attack on what they believed was God's ordained order. This fear led to the formation of influential organizations like the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, which was founded in 1987. Their specific aim was to articulate and defend complementarianism, the belief that men and women are equal in dignity, but distinct in roles, with men having the leadership authority in the home and church, and then women with raising children and homemaking.
I think that we've gone wrong here, that women should prioritize family and children way above career, that they should try to find their husband before they're 25, that they should try to get married way younger. This is probably the fertility
But then that
problem.
also goes back to just finances.
No, that's
you
a
can't
huge problem. I
quite
totally agree with
have
that.
a husband going out making a salary to have a stay-at-home.
I completely agree with that. That's the best argument. It's not a winner argument, but it's the best argument. Because at some point, you go to like sub-Saharan Africa, they have like 8 kids and they live in like a dirt hut. You can figure it out. Having children, I believe, is a blessing from the Lord. It's the most amazing thing.
They produced foundational documents like the Danvers Statement and later the Nashville Statement, which explicitly condemned any deviation from these gender roles, particularly regarding any sort of queer identity and roles for women in leadership. For many of us, these names, these statements, though we might not have actually known them by name growing up, they were the underlying theological scaffolding that Kirk's arguments are built on. They provided respected, definitive answers handed down from trusted theologians. And who are the key figures in texts that popularized these ideas within our churches and homes? There are names that will be familiar to you, like John Piper, with his emphasis on Christian hedonism and very specific ideas about male and female glory. Then there was Wayne Grudem, whose systematic theology defined complementarianism for countless seminarians and lay leaders. Vadi Bakum, who champions a very traditional family structure. And in more charismatic circles, figures like Mark Driscoll, whose aggressive views on masculinity and in submission became incredibly influential, although controversial. For many of us, these names, these books, and these sermons, and these voices were incredibly foundational. They provided the theological justification for Charlie Kirk's political and social commentary. He is, in essence, just popularizing their theological framework for a broader, politically engaged audience. Let's talk quickly about the specific biblical interpretation that is underpinning these views. It's a classic case of selective literalism. Certain passages are cherry-picked and interpreted as absolute, as timeless, and prescriptive commands for all time. Think about Genesis 2 and 3, which are oftentimes used to argue that Eve's creation from Adam's ribs signifies male headship, and that the fall narrative is used to justify hierarchy as a curse that somehow validates male authority. Passages like Ephesians 5:22 through 33 tells wives to submit to their husbands, and then 1 Timothy 2:11 through 14 says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. These are read as direct universal injunctions. Meanwhile, other biblical narratives and passages that complicate this rigid hierarchy are either ignored, dismissed, or reinterpreted.
One of the tricks of the enemy, and the end times talk about this, is going to be the intentional blurring of distinctions that allow us to be free, that allow us to grow closer to God. And every single one of them is laid out in the first 11 books of Genesis. For example, the distinction of God and man, that we are not God and we should worship God, but we are made in the image of God, as it says in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. As it says in Genesis 1:1, which is the verse that changes everything. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That means that there is a being greater than you that has a purpose for you to be here. That your existence is not.
What about the female prophets that you never hear about, like Deborah or Huldah? What about Junia, a female apostle mentioned in Romans? What about the numerous women who held positions of influence and leadership in the early church, even within the New Testament? These are often either explained away as exceptions, or their roles are downplayed to fit the predetermined gender roles. The focus is on maintaining a rigid gender hierarchy, often at the expense of biblical scholarship that considers historical, cultural, and linguistic contexts. The context of a patriarchal ancient world is often ignored or even celebrated as God's unchanging ideal, rather than a cultural reality through which the Spirit was working. The theology goes even deeper than that. There's often an idea that hierarchy is inherent in God's nature, a concept sometimes controversially drawn from the interpretation of the Trinity itself. The idea that within the Godhead you have the Son, the Father, and the Spirit. That there's a relational submission that serves as a model for female and male roles. That is a highly debated theological point, but it is used to justify a divinely ordained top-down structure for human relationships. Further, sin and redemption are often framed within this rigid gender context. Sin is presented not just as a transgression against God, but as a disruption of his natural order, his divine order. And redemption, it's not just about salvation. It's about returning to that pre-fall order, where female submission and male headship are seen as restoring God's perfect original design. And then all of this is wrapped up in the overarching culture war mentality. For many evangelicals, anti-feminism became central to their broader battle against secularism, liberalism, and perceived moral decay in society. Feminism was presented not just as a social movement, but as a direct spiritual threat, one of the primary enemies in this battle for the soul of America. If you accept feminist ideas, then you're essentially siding with the enemy and undermining God's kingdom and contributing to the moral decline of the nation.
The culture for so long, they had, the feminist movement. We can blame that for destroying the nuclear home. We can blame that for destroying marriages in a lot of ways. But how do we kind of work backwards from that, kind of get back to like the core American values?
A revival will only happen with repentance. And repentance is at odds with pride. We have an entire month dedicated to pride, by the way. We will not save the country just through politics. Politics is a means towards an end, a means towards liberty, but liberty is not man's idea, it's God's idea. And we are only able to experience that liberty if we are a moral and religious people. The Constitution is incompatible with a faithless nation. You will not have a free society if the country goes atheist. You will not have a free society if the country goes secular. That sounds provocative, but it's true. Because eventually, you're going to want to have some form of meaning in your life, and usually that meaning is left-wing politics. And I'm not trying to pick on all those people chanting out there, because they're actually crying for help.
It creates an environment where anti-feminist rhetoric isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated as being courageous and standing for truth in a wicked world. Finally, let's consider the psychological and social functions that these anti-feminist views served within evangelicalism. For many, this rigid structure provided a really clear, simple framework for a complex world. It reduced anxiety by dictating clear roles and expectations, leaving little room for ambiguity or difficult decisions. It told you exactly who you were supposed to be and what you were supposed to do. This system deeply intersected with purity culture, where female bodies and female autonomy were often linked directly to male temptation and sin.
Fraternity guy and a sorority girl at age 19 hooking up, both 5 drinks in at 2 a.m. and all of a sudden she like removes consent. Yeah, like that's a murky middle gray area. And excuse me when I say...
She still removed consent, did she not?
Okay, but again,
if he continues to go onward with that encounter,
again,
then he is sexually assaulting her.
Again, that is such an unfair categorization. Like,
no,
again, it's very case dependent.
The purity ring wasn't just about sex. It was about defining your identity and future role within that gendered framework, promising a safe and approved path to a biblical marriage and family. And all of this fed into a broader authoritarianism. By reinforcing a top-down structure in the home and church, it normalizes obedience to authority and discourages individuals' discernment in favor of submission. The unspoken question was always, if you question the gender roles, what else will you question next? Will you even question the core doctrines? Will you question the leaders that God has appointed to you? What about your faith? What about God himself? This is precisely why these gender roles are so fiercely defended by figures like Charlie Kirk. They're not just about women, they're about maintaining a very specific system of power and control. So we've analyzed Charlie Kirk's arguments and we've traced their roots back into the theological and cultural soil of evangelicalism. Now let's talk about the real world impact. Because these aren't just abstract ideas discussed in seminary classrooms or on political podcasts. They have profound, tangible consequences on the lives of individuals, particularly those who have tried to live within these systems and those who are now trying to exit them. For Exvangelicals, this impact is often deeply personal, shaping our very sense of self and our relationships. One of the most insidious impacts is the development of internalized misogyny. Growing up in an environment where female autonomy, ambition, or critical thought were subtly or overtly discouraged for women, it leads to a profound struggle with self-doubt and self-blame. It teaches you to distrust your own desires, your own intuition, and your own voice, especially if that voice doesn't align with what your prescribed gender roles say according to evangelicalism. It can cause people to struggle with feelings of, self-worth or not being enough because the goalposts of biblical womanhood are often unattainable for any human beings. It also deeply impacts relationship dysfunction. These teachings, particularly the headship and submission model, create incredibly unbalanced power dynamics in relationships. Wives are often subtly or even overtly pressured to submit, to defer to their husbands, and to silence their own needs and desires for the sake of peace or spiritual unity. Emotional manipulation is frequently reframed as spiritual leadership from the husband. This model often prevents genuine partnership, it fosters resentment, and can lead to deeply unhealthy and even abusive dynamics, all under the guise of biblical authority. Trust becomes conditional, and true intimacy, built on mutual respect and vulnerability, becomes very, very difficult to achieve. The husband is burdened with an impossible and almost divine leadership role that is mostly in his thought life, whereas the wife is completely stripped of her agency and in charge of doing all of the household tasks and charge and caring for everyone. And this brings us back to spiritual abuse and trauma. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's critical to connect it directly here too. When your most vulnerable parts, your past trauma, your genuine questions, your desire for equality or a healthy relationship, when that's dismissed as rebellion or your desire for a fulfilling life outside of that role is called sin, that's not just a theological disagreement. disagreement, that is spiritual abuse. It weaponizes the sacred against the individual, creating deep wounds that can last a lifetime. This trauma can actually manifest as a deep struggle with intimacy, identity confusion, or even symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Religious trauma syndrome is so real, and many survivors report feeling the effects. The ultimate impact for many exvangelicals is a profound loss of identity. The existential crisis that arises when you realize your previous God-given identity, the one that you built your entire life around, was actually a culturally constructed and politically convenient role. Beyond the personal impacts, these views have a broader societal impact. Charlie Kirk's rhetoric, rooted in these evangelical anti-feminist doctrines, is not just commentary. It's actively fueling political opposition to basic human rights.
Do human beings have tails?
I'm not exactly sure the essence of the
Do
question.
human beings have tails? Do you have a tail?
You know, I have never met anyone with a tail. I'm not exactly sure the...
Exactly. But fetuses have tails. Kind of proves that at that phase, they are not a human being. They got tails. Humans don't have tails. We're not dinosaurs. Let me even show you a photo, if I may, okay? Do you truly, in your heart of hearts, truly believe that this is a human being? This?
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt?
Yes.
This is a dolphin fetus.
It manifests in ongoing battles against reproductive rights and bodily autonomy, against queer equality, and against workplace protections that aim for actual, genuine gender equality. When a powerful voice, especially a political voice like Charlie Kirk's...
Hold on. Okay.
Go live like a socialist.
The point is larger than that, Charlie.
I live like a capitalist every single day, Shank.
guys.
I live as a capitalist,
hey,
okay? I live when I believe.
No.
What do? I get charity every single year.
Hold on.
What's my salary? Less than his.
Charlie, take a
Come on,
seat.
Shank, let's go.
Charlie, what are you doing? Take a seat. Take a seat.
Psycho?
All right, no. Take a seat. You're gonna take a seat. You're gonna take a seat over here.
Oh my God.
amplifies these type of views, it legitimizes discrimination and reinforces harmful stereotypes on a national scale. This contributes directly to a widespread mental health crisis, especially among young women and gender-diverse individuals who grow up in these environments. The internal conflict, the pressure to conform, and the shame and the spiritual abuse contributes to rising rates of anxiety, depression, identity confusion, and even eating disorders. They're told that their very nature is flawed or wrong or sinful, which can lead to immense psychological distress. The promise of happiness within rigid gender roles often turns into unhappiness, profound unhappiness, and the system frequently then blames the individual rather than acknowledging its own inherent flaws or that it's not the best thing for everyone. Ultimately, the unchallenged perpetuation of anti-feminist rhetoric, particularly when cloaked in religious authority, contributes to a culture where abuse and inequality can not only flourish, but are also actively rationalized and defended. It creates a climate where power imbalances are seen as divine and dissent is labeled as rebellion, leaving those who are harmed with really nowhere to turn and nowhere to find justice. So we've covered the arguments, their origins, and the painful consequences. I know that it's a lot to take in and it can feel really heavy, so thank you guys so much if you've made it this far. The purpose of this deep dive isn't just to point out the problems, it's kind of also to point a path going forward for you guys. I think the first thing that we can do is acknowledge the pain. You guys have seen time and time again in my videos on church hurt that it's my pet peeve that Christians in the church a lot of times will not, refuse to take accountability for the hurt and abuse that happens in their institutions. They say, people hurt people and so you're going to get hurt anywhere. But they won't acknowledge that their organizations see higher rates of abusive behavior, higher rates of people coming out with trauma, and higher rates of bad behavior. So acknowledging the pain is really, really essential. It can be a difficult, messy, and long process to acknowledge your own pain or the pain of the people around you, and it's okay to grieve and mourn and be sad about what was lost and be confused about who you are and what you believe now or what you want in the future. There is no set timeline for healing, and you do not need to rush it because your pain is real and the harm is real. The next thing that we can do is make sure we're using the actual definitions of these words. What is feminism? It's not anti-men. It's pro-equality, pro-autonomy, pro-choice. It seeks liberation for everyone by challenging the rigid, unhealthy boxes that patriarchy puts men and women into. True feminism allows men to be emotional, caring, and vulnerable, and involved fathers without shame. And it also allows for a richness of human experience beyond these outdated gender roles. Then we can also redefine faith. For those who are still identifying as a Christian, how can faith be disentangled from patriarchy and oppressive gender roles? It means exploring egalitarian interpretations of scripture, looking into feminist theology, or simply cultivating a personal, spiritual identity that is rooted in justice, compassion, and true liberation. It means understanding that there are more diverse ways to be a follower of Christ, and you don't have to follow specific gender roles to get there. You can also learn more, read widely, don't just consume content that confirms your existing biases. Seek out diverse voices and read feminist theory, delve into the history of women's rights movements, explore different theological perspectives, and understand ultimately why other people believe differently and how their interpretations are often more biblically sound and more ethically robust than what you were taught in an evangelical setting. Knowledge is power. Finally, therapy and support is monumental. For those who have experienced religious trauma, professional help is not just beneficial, it's oftentimes completely necessary. Seek out licensed therapists who understand religious trauma, spiritual abuse, and the complexities of deconstruction. Connecting with other exvangelicals, whether it's just finding those kind of, groups or content online, it can help you to feel a lot less alone. Ultimately, this entire process is about empowerment. It's realizing that your body, your mind, your spirit, your choices, your future, they're all yours to define for yourself. The process of deconstructing the anti-feminist patriarchal brand that evangelicals kind of put forward is ongoing. It's an ongoing process and not just a single thing that you do. There is no finish line. It's a continual thing that you can continue learning about and deconstructing. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's recap the journey we just took. We've meticulously analyzed how Charlie Kirk's anti-feminist views are not random political opinions, but deeply rooted in specific evangelical doctrines of complementarianism and patriarchy that many of us grew up with. We've explored the very real, often painful impact that these views have had on individuals in society, from internalized shame and relationship dysfunction to broader political implications. And most importantly, we've begun to outline a path forward, which is a path of reclaiming definitions, seeking healing, and embracing authenticity. My hope in creating this kind of content is not to demonize any individual, but to shed light on a system of thought that has caused immense pain and restricted human flourishing for a very long time. For those of us who have walked away from the church, who have chosen to step off that path, the journey can feel isolating, but it is an act of profound spiritual courage. Thank you guys so much for watching. It means so much to me. Let me know what you think about this and about Charlie Kirk. Have you seen his content before? Do you agree with him, or do you land more where I land? I would love to hear your guys' thoughts, and let me know if you'd like me to do more commentary on religious political content, if that makes sense. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please like the video. Please subscribe or double check to make sure that you are subscribed if you're not already. You can always hit share and copy link. You don't have to send it anywhere, I promise, but it helps way more than you think that it will. You can also comment anything. I would love to talk to you guys in the comments. I do respond to as many of you guys as I possibly can. So if you comment, I will likely respond to you. But if you don't know what to say, you can always comment a dove. I'll respond back with a white heart, and it just helps push me out there a little bit more. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys have an incredible rest of your week.
Lord, when are the end times?
In this generation.
So that means 2,000 years from now when Texas gives Israel a bunch of red heifers.
Jesus, are your end time prophecies about us?
No, they're about Philip in Georgia reading the Schofield Bible 2,000 years from now.
Who's Philip?
You'll never know.
This generation will not pass away until all these things take place.
Man, sounds intense. I'm glad you didn't say this to my face, or I'd think you were talking to me.
Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. 10, 10, 10, 20s on your titties, bitch. 100 deep, VIP, no guest list. To T-Raw, you don't know who you fucking with. Got my other bitch, fucking with my other bitch. Fucking all night, we ain't sell a bit. Say I'm too dope, I ain't selling it. Bar fresher than a motherfucking peppermint. Good gold Letterman's, last king killing shit. Yeah, young money, yeah, we getting rich. Got your grandma on my dick. Girl, you know what it is. Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. 10, 10, 10, 20s and the 50s, bitch. Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. Rack City, bitch, rack city, bitch. 10, 10, 10, 20s and the 50s, bitch. I'm a motherfucking star. Look at the paint on the car. Too much rim, make the ride too hard. Tell that bitch hop out, walk the boulevard. Hot, I need my money pronto. Get it in the morning like Alonzo. Rondo, green got cheese like a nacho. You ain't got no ass, bitch, wear a poncho.